Happy Halloween, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a spooky episode of Retro Rampage for my favorite time of year. The leaves are changing, weather's getting colder, and for some reason, the dead don't seem to want to stay dead. But they seem comfortable enough. But it's a dangerous thing to go digging up the past. Any skeleton will tell you that. Retro games are often the same. Some of them. Maybe better left forgotten. There's only one way to find out, though. And that's by getting this Halloween episode underway. The dead are out, and they've taken over the country. This is Zombie Nation for the NES. Get ready for one of the most bizarre games you can find on the NES. Zombie Nation is an enigma. It defies explanation, and yet here I am about to dive right into it. Things are about to get awful spooky here on Retro Rampage, so I hope you're prepared to see what this game has to offer. Zombie Nation. With a title like that, it conjures up so many mental images. One would hardly know what to make of it based off the box art, which I admittedly do love. There's no way this is an illustration. These are handmade zombie models positioned in front of a pre-built backdrop. I think it looks awesome, but what's up with the scale here? The car is smaller than the zombies, and that's clearly a Hot Wheels car, so maybe the zombies are really tiny? I haven't even addressed the elephant in the room, this giant floating head in the background. What's going on there? I wouldn't have been able to guess what kind of game this is if I had seen it on the store shelf in 1991. It presents so many questions just from the box art alone. Staring at the label isn't going to give me any answers though, so get ready to raise the undead. It's time to play some Zombie Nation. Zombie Nation kicks off with a wall of text explaining the game's story. In 1999, a meteorite crashed in the Nevada desert containing a malevolent alien creature, Darkseid. Hey, maybe Darkseid can tell them to reopen Desperado while he's down there. Anyway, Darkseid wastes no time in taking control of the United States. By using what the game refers to as magnetic rays, he reduces the populace to mindless zombies. So these aren't your typical undead zombies, but rather of the mind-controlled variety. In addition, the magnetic rays allow Darkseid to take control of many weapons, including a powerful samurai sword called Shura. Meanwhile, in Japan, Namakubi, the great head of the samurai, somehow gets wind of this and makes his way to the United States to take down Darkseid and liberate the US citizens from the evil mind control. Whew, you get all that? That's a slightly more involved story than you were probably expecting, but trust me, the weirdness has only just begun with this game. Samurai Zombie Nation gives you the choice to play its main 4 stages in any order. Well, sort of. You can pick your starting stage, but after that it just continues in numerical order. So if you start at stage 4, it will loop back to stage 1 next and continue from there. There's also a difficulty select. You can choose easy and hard, but we'll come back to that. So let's finally start up here and see what the game is like. I love this already. Okay, so as you can see, it's a 2D shooter, but instead of piloting a spaceship or a plane, it's a giant floating disembodied head. Yeah, when the game referred to Namakubi as the great head of the samurai, you probably thought he was the leader of a group of samurai, right? But no, he's a giant severed head of a samurai. In fact, the name Namakubi directly translates to severed head in English, and it's also the name of a popular type of tattoo in Japan. These are usually, you guessed it, severed heads. So this is already weird enough, but to further complicate things, the manual specifies that this is not the actual head of Namakubi. Rather, it's a holographic representation of his head conjured up by his mystical powers. Alright, there's been enough weird stuff so far, so I'll buy that, but then how is the head able to manifest tangible projectiles to shoot at enemies? Oh, who knows, it's a video game after all. So stage 1 is New York City, and we have to maneuver Namakubi around, destroying everything in sight. One might think that we're the antagonist by blowing up all this stuff, but the manual says that's the only way to break Darkseid's spell, so there you go. Namakubi shoots his own eyeballs and spit as projectiles, and they have a strange trajectory. The eyes shoot straight ahead, but the spit arcs downwards, and there are no other weapons in the game to pick up, so you better get used to it. There's also no way to shoot backwards, so you have to be very mindful of your positioning. One thing I'm immediately impressed by is the sheer amount of things you can destroy in this game. Buildings and obstacles are made up of individual tiles that can be blown up, erupting into flames, and there's hardly any slowdown in this game. There is sprite flicker though, so be aware, but if you play a lot of NES games, then you're probably used to it already. This can, however, make projectiles difficult to see. Buildings, planes, tanks, and even zombie soldiers can all be destroyed, netting you tons of points. Namakubi's movement, however, takes some time to get used to. He actually has momentum when you move, so he doesn't stop on a dime when you let go of the D-pad. This means you have to compensate for the momentum by holding your next direction much earlier than you normally would. Oh, and remember that difficulty select from earlier? You would think that the hard mode would up the damage that the enemies do or make them have more health. But no, the main thing hard mode does is make Namakubi's momentum worse. Have you ever heard of a game having a hard mode that just makes the game more difficult to control? Wrap your severed head around that. I recommend just keeping it on easy. It's not like the levels change or anything. Only having 4 levels might make the game seem short, but they can actually be pretty long as they're usually divided up into 2 or more sections. Namakubi has a pretty decent sized health bar, so you have a lot of room to take damage if needed, and you can restore health by scoring enough points. If you're low on health, I recommend finding a piece of destructible terrain and just going crazy, blowing up as much as possible. You're almost guaranteed to get back 1 or 2 hit points. Your standard shot may not seem that great, but believe it or not, it can actually be upgraded. Every so often while blowing up terrain, you'll see people falling from the debris. These are what the manual refers to as zombie hostages. I have no idea if these are zombies who broke free from the mind control somehow, or just normal people being held hostage by the zombies, but when you see them, you can catch them by flying into them. For each hostage you rescue, this little running man down here will advance 1 space. Rescue 5 hostages, and you'll advance to shot level 2, then another 5 and you'll reach level 3. Each time you level up, your rate of fire increases, and it seems that your shots get some slight homing properties. Even once you've reached the 3rd level, there's still an incentive to rescue hostages. Every 5 you collect after this will give you a screen-clearing bomb which you can use with the A button. It's indicated by this star icon here. It's pretty useful, especially in the later levels, but you can only hold 1 at a time, so make sure to use it before you rescue another 5 hostages. One piece of advice I can give is whatever you do, do not touch the lightning, or anything that flashes for that matter. These are supposed to represent the magnetic rays that Darkseid used to enslave the populace. If 1 pixel of your head touches these, they'll absolutely shred through your health and you'll be on death's door, and the placement of the lightning can be pretty cheap too, so it really keeps you on your toes. The lightning can't kill you, however, but it can bring you down to a single point of health, and from there all it takes is 1 cheap shot from an enemy to send you right to the game over screen. At the end of the first stage, we fight a giant Medusa, and hang on, that's clearly the Statue of Liberty. I just want to point out that I'm playing an NES game where I'm fighting a Medusa Statue of Liberty as a giant flying severed head. But there is a reason it's Medusa, though. Okay, so Zombie Nation was originally released in Japan under the title Abarenbo Tengu. The plot is largely the same, but instead of the severed head of a samurai on a mission to retrieve his sword, the prayers of the American people reach the Japanese god of peace, the Great Tengu. He creates a giant Tengu mask and flies it to the United States on a mission to liberate the American people. In this version of the game, the first boss is in fact a possessed Statue of Liberty, but I guess having a Japanese samurai blowing up the Statue of Liberty wouldn't have gone over very well here, so it was changed to Medusa instead. The intro text still mentions the Statue of Liberty though. Someone didn't proofread. I just love the thought process here. Oh, Americans aren't gonna know what a Tengu mask is. Change it to a giant severed samurai head. Hey, I'm not complaining. That's kinda morbid and I love it. Fits with Halloween after all. The game is fun, but be careful. If you die at all, you get an immediate game over. The game gives you a generous amount of continues, and you can even earn more by scoring enough points, but the game will always downgrade you back to shot level 1, so you have to work your way back up. So, we blew up the Statue of Liberty, good job there, and now we're off to our next great American landmark, the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, most of this level consists of blowing up rocks, so I hope you didn't get too attached to the flaming buildings from before. You'll need to blast your way through these rocks to make a path below the lightning, and yes, even the clouds can hurt you too, so don't even think about going up there. Eventually you'll reach what looks like an airstrip or military base, and that gets blown up too. In the second section, we've descended to what I guess is the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and there are all kinds of random creatures flying around. You'd better be at shot level 3 to deal with all this incoming, including falling rocks that have the same effect as the lightning. Piranhas, snakes, swimming zombies, and even the water is your enemy here, as every time you go through a waterfall, the current will push you to the bottom of the screen. It gets worse once you reach this section where the whole screen is a waterfall, so you're constantly fighting against the controls to maintain your position without dropping too far down. One of the enemies you'll encounter here are blue clones of Namakubi, and they take a ton of hits unless you have a bomb. These enemies only show up here and then they're never seen again, so I don't know what that's about. This level's boss is Atlas, the Titan from Greek mythology. Oh, so the Statue of Liberty has to get changed for the US version, but the buff muscle man is A-OK? He's pretty easy though. He throws axes, which can be tough to dodge, but as long as you keep up a consistent rate of fire, you'll whittle down his health before he can throw more than 2. On to the third stage, the oil fields of Texas. So much for great American landmarks, I guess. Here's where the difficulty really starts to ramp up. Enemies take more damage and it's harder to tell what terrain can and can't be destroyed. You have to time it right to make it through these smokestacks, which are this level's version of lightning. Not to mention these missiles, which all have a different trajectory and they move so fast it's difficult to react accordingly. This level also has giant flying robots, which I guess the military has in this universe. Section 2 is my least favorite area in the game as we descend into the caverns beneath the oil field. Passageways are narrow and the enemies come at you fast, which means you'll rack up a lot of damage here. Also, some of the paths lead to dead ends, and with the auto-scrolling screen, there's sure to be a few deaths ahead. This section is decently long as well, so be prepared to spend a good bit of time here. Once you reach the end, you might be surprised to see a third level section, but this is actually the boss, a giant mobile nuclear plant. It pretty much acts as a third section, but you'll need to fight your way to the end and destroy the core of the plant. One thing I don't like about these boss fights is that the heads-up display disappears, so you have no idea how much health you have left. This also means you can't use bombs during boss fights, which makes them that much harder. The nuclear plant is equipped with laser cannons, and if I've learned anything today, it's to avoid anything that flashes, so this is a tricky boss to take down. At the end, you have to avoid spinning projectiles while shooting the core before you finally take the thing down. Okay, final level time, and it's the wildly non-specific caverns of the north-central US. This level has it all: flying rocks, red waterfalls, erratic enemy patterns, and an absolute ton of breakable terrain. So remember the rule: if you're low on health, shoot the rocks. Shoot the rocks! Despite all this, I actually find this level a bit easier than Stage 3. It's definitely shorter for one, and most of the real annoying enemies can be taken out with a bomb, and there are plenty of opportunities early in the level to rescue hostages and get that meter up. There's not even a second section to the level. Once you reach this wall of fire, you go straight to the boss, the Venusian snakes. Venusian? I don't know. They're 4 extraterrestrial snakes from, you guessed it, Venus. This is one of the few times I ever noticed slowdown in this game, but here it can be beneficial. The snakes follow your location, so you have to lead them around the screen, and only their heads can be attacked. Even after you've killed a snake or two, their skeletons can still hurt you, so be careful. Once you beat them, congratulations, you've cleared all 4 levels. There is technically a 5th stage, but it only houses the final boss fight with Darkseid, and... that's Darkseid? You kidding me? The intro built him up to be some kind of demonic overlord with horrible powers, but here he just looks like the most generic alien I've ever seen. He doesn't even attack you directly. Instead, he just floats there while these projectiles orbit around him. They can be a pain to dodge, but if you got here with enough health and at least shot level 2, you don't have to dodge at all. Just shoot him consistently and the battle will be over in under 20 seconds. Some threatening alien he turned out to be. With Darkseid vanquished, we then get one of the strangest endings I've ever seen in a game. The US flag flies over the White House, and I think I beat the game, guys. They even congratulate you 3 times in case you didn't notice it the first time. Then we get what I can best describe as random shots of the United States, with the US flag thrown in there every so often. Go America! It's a very patriotic ending, despite the fact that the United States was just saved by a Japanese severed head. Speaking of which, Namakubi is not mentioned at all in this ending, so I guess he returned to Japan and reunited with his body. There's no mention of that sword either, more evidence that it's something that was made up just for the US version of the game. And I guess all the zombies reverted back to normal people. I'm just guessing here because the game sure as heck doesn't tell me. Ugh, what a trip that was. So that was Zombie Nation, or Aberenbo Tengu if you're in Japan. Not quite the horror-themed experience I thought it would be, but still absolutely worth playing just due to its bizarreness alone. Zombie Nation is far from a perfect game. It can be frustrating, the difficulty is all over the place, and it has a ridiculous amount of sprite flicker, and yet I was having too much fun to care. This game is the NES equivalent of watching a movie you know is bad and laughing at its absurdity the whole time. It controls well enough, though I could do without the whole momentum mechanic, and it's very impressive for the NES graphically. The soundtrack also isn't half bad. It has a very experimental vibe to it with a lot of samples which you don't hear too often in NES games. There are only a handful of tracks I would listen to outside of the game, such as the first 2 level themes, but what we have here fits the gameplay just fine. I wouldn't consider this a hidden gem or anything, but it's worth checking out if you like 2D shooters or games that are just plain weird. Unfortunately, Zombie Nation has become one of the most expensive NES games ever released, so I wouldn't recommend paying up for a physical copy. Thankfully, Zombie Nation is available on both Steam and Nintendo Switch in a really nice pack that includes both the US and Japanese versions of the game, as well as a wealth of bonus content pertaining to the game. This is the version I'd recommend for ease of access. Zombie Nation exists in a weird niche of NES games that aren't talked about all that often, but are still worth playing on their own merits. All its problems aside, I still enjoyed my playthrough of Zombie Nation, and I'm sure I'll play it again sometime in the future. It helps that you can beat it in under half an hour, too. But all zombies should stay dead, so it's time I return this to the earth where I found it and lay it to rest. Thank you all so much for joining me for this extra spooky episode of Retro Rampage. I'll be back in the future to review some more games, but for now, have yourselves a happy Halloween.